this is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the Mass Tsunami podcast. This weekend, we are offering 5 conversations from episode 17, our preview of the EASL Congress 2024, plus from the vault, one of the conversations from the preview for EASL Congress 2023. Before starting, I want to note this is one of the, I think, most interesting and exciting episodes we've done in a long time, and I hope my descriptions reflect that. You're going to want to hear all of this. This conversation revolves largely around 2 big data presentations Hannes Hagstrom's team is sharing at the EASL Congress. Every other panelist has at least one comment to make about the future of big data in MASLD. Hannes describes 2 big data studies of his own, as he puts it, very much big data, but not omics. They are based on an examination of 860,000 residents of Stockholm who took a liver test sometime between 2010 and 2022. The first one seeks to eliminate liver and cardiovascular risk relying on a tool from Stefano Romeo's group Gothenburg called the Fibrotic Mass Index. The results demonstrated prediction of liver-related and cardio-related outcomes at a high level. The other study relied on the same data set to build a prediction model for liver-related outcomes in the general population. But instead of relying on a dedicated test like Fib4, which has false positives and false negatives at levels that are probably too high for a medical system to tolerate in the long run, this assimilates 5 simple parameters: ALT, AST, GGT, gender, age, and proves to be far more accurate risk assessment than Fib4. His study team will also present a small web-based calculator where, as he puts it, people can go to estimate the risk. The tricky part, Hannes notes, is to decide what is a tolerable risk threshold. 0.5%, 1%, 5%, 10%. That's yet to be determined. Jorn, thinking about the sample size of 860,000 cases, asks, how much data is big enough for big data? Hannes notes that if in fact the data were big enough, you'd have a population study and you wouldn't need to do statistical testing at all. Michelle considers the overarching implication of Hannes' comment and says, and I quote, I think a risk-based view of this disease makes a lot of sense. Alexander and I concur that using a risk-based screening approach is preferable, in large part because it should allow a far larger share of resources to be devoted to those with significant disease. This episode left me extremely jazzed about Milan and EASL Congress 2024. Each discussion crackles with energy, enthusiasm, and insight. You'll want to listen a lot. I'm probably going to listen to each one at least 2 times. So just sit back, listen, enjoy, learn. And when you're done, join the discussions, our LinkedIn discussion group. Excellent. Okay, Hannes, you're up.
Hannes Hagstrom.
Okay, thank you. So we will have, I'll mention two, which are unfortunately 2 orals from our group, which just, unfortunately, they are on the exact same time and day. So I have to really clone myself here, Alexander, to go to listen to both.
I also have 2 at the same time.
But so it's sort of on the same topic. It's very much big data, but it's not omics. It's more many patients. So we have one new data set where we have identified everybody in Stockholm with a liver test between 2010 and 2022, and it's turned out to be 860,000 people. And then we tried to estimate, the modern prevalence of steatotic liver disease and so on. And in one study, we used a rather novel non-invasive risk score developed by Stefano Romeo's group called Fibrotic Mass Index, which tries to estimate the presence of MASH with F2 or to F4 in the Stockholm population. And of course, it's a little bit selection bias because you can only measure the people with have a ALT test, but turns out that's 860,000 people, so it's maybe not that selective. And then we will present, what's the underlying at-risk population, and we also can see that if you use that, you can actually identify a group of patients which are at high risk for both liver-related but also quite high risk for cardiovascular-related outcomes. So you sort of really identify an at-risk group that would need sort of holistic treatment. So that's one which is going to be presented on Friday morning, and the other, which is also quite interesting, I think, is a new prediction model for liver-related outcomes in the general population. So as you know, today we try to get people to calculate the Fib4, and that has its own limitations with a lot of false positives but also false negatives. But this is moving into a little bit different philosophy, where we, instead of trying to diagnose something, this model is telling you, okay, what's the percentage in this individual patient that he or she will get a liver-related outcome within 10 years. And the model is then, predicting that risk. So you enter a few very simple parameters, AST, ALT, gamma GT, age, and sex, and you get the percentage. Then we have validated these results in several big cohorts, including UK Biobank, and it stands out pretty good, and it's far better than Fib4. So we will present that, and we will also present a small calculator, web-based calculator, where people can go and estimate the risk. And I think one thing I'm trying to push that we maybe need to go in that direction of, as a first-line test, maybe not make a diagnosis, but maybe make a risk assessment and decide on the next steps based on that. The tricky part is, however, to decide on what is the risk threshold that we are comfortable with. When do we refer patients to a hepatologist? Should it be at 5% or 10% or 0.5%? And that's a little bit also up to the individual patient and the caregivers and the health system that you are in. What are your resources? So that's going to be interesting. And the first paper is developed by one of my PhD students, Emily, who's a brilliant PhD student and a health economist actually, and the other one is by an equally brilliant postdoc, Rickard, who is a mathematician and a biostatistician. He actually wrote a very nice also seminar in JHEP, published recently, about like a guide, how do you really make a prediction model. So high quality stuff, I think.
Jörn Schattenberg.
Hannes, when I listen to you, I wonder how big a database is big enough, or is there too big? When do you get overestimation of effects because you keep on including more and more patients? I know you must have been thinking about that.
No, I mean, if you have a big enough data set, then you don't need to make any statistical tests, right? You can just say, well, this is the whole population. So this is not a sample anymore. This is the truth.
Alexander Craig.
That's a dream of the epidemiologist, Hannes.
I like the way you think about this. Yeah.
And yet you're still at the database level. So we try to go closer to the patients. And I guess that's exactly the interaction. You need both things.
Yes, I think these are complementary things, right? I'm finding it a bit difficult to, do. Maybe we will get down in price, and so with the genetics and the omics, so we can implement it on a broader level. But for now, I think we maybe need those tools, in our specialty clinics where we see patients, and maybe at the primary care level, we need something a bit more simple. That's my view as well.
Michelle Long.
Yeah, Hannes, I really like where you're going with this. I think the risk-based view of this disease makes a lot of sense, especially also thinking about the new nomenclature and how it plays out. If you can define the disease by metabolic risk factors and presence of fat in the liver, and then you can say, okay, this person is at so much risk of liver events, that means something to patient. It means something to health authorities, payers, everybody. It's very tangible, rather than you're diagnosed with some F stage maybe by this one pathologist versus another. So I really like it. I think it's a smart way of looking at the future. So well done. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, Hannes, I can only agree that we need to go to the next level. We continue to push Fib4, but I think that should just be seen as an example of an index test. We got in liver screen, we did the liver risk score, and we developed the liver pro score, which we will also present here, developed in 10,000 with liver biopsy and validated in 460,000 UK Biobank, and outperforms all the others. And I think there what we manage now is to get a CE marking, so it actually has a quality stamp to implement it in. So actually we do have the tools now that can be implemented in hospital system, because the issue is often you come with something that's smarter, but you cannot use them there because there are all these regulatory things. So we managed to pass that barrier, and I do agree that this is the next level, because the Fib4 is associated with, it's a good one for rule out, but it is, if we have the cutoff 1.3, associated with many false positives. And healthcare systems, we simply drown. There's not enough of us, and we will never have a cost-effective healthcare pathway if we do not have something more effective as the index test, the cheap test very close to the patient. So that's again something very important work we will do in the coming years. So we do love the new nomenclature, etc., but also need to be checked out. So and the interesting thing is that the behavior do changes. So what we had the opportunity to do, it will be a late breaker. It's actually the abstract that's presented in the new session just before the MASLD guidelines. So what we did was we had 1,000 people we assessed 3 years back for steatotic liver disease. And what we did then, we reassessed them then 3 years down, roughly 3 years down the road. And then we say, okay, we take the nomenclature face value, put it down here, index, and then we see 3 years later. And then we see how many change group. We basically have 4 groups: no ASLD, MASLD, mid-ALD, and ALD. And you'll be surprised that this is more dynamic than we think, because particular alcohol consumption can change, steatosis can change, cardiovascular risk factors not so much. But this has some implications, How do we see this? And also in terms of clinical trials, where do people end in? When are they they eligible for trial, but also when are they eligible for treatment, depending on these things. So I'll urge you also to have a look at that one.
So as a guy who comes from a policy background, which is where I started out a long, long time ago, you just have blown my mind twice. Hannes, as a policymaker, if I had a finite budget to spend on SLD, I would love to find the most efficient way to drill down to the patients where I need to do the kinds of things that we're talking about with omics and genetics and all that, right? Spend as much of my money as possible on the subsection of the patient population that really needs to have money spent on it. So the cheaper we can make good screening, the better job we can do at treating the sick. So that's the one. And Alexander, I'm fascinated from a very different perspective on yours, which is that those are massively important decisions in terms of designing trials. And if trials tell us what works and what doesn't work, there's tremendous power in being able to do that better. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. We need, the closer we get to patients with the lower prevalence in the population, and we should have very cheap, effective tests that does not involve guys like us. But the closer you come to important decisions such as treatment or not, and long-term treatment that's probably costly, then you can actually afford more advanced tests. And if you want to assess the treatment effect, let's say 1 year down the road, again, you should not continue infinitely on any drug if you're not sure it actually works. There again, you will see the cost benefit of having also, let's say, it could be an omics-based test, which would often be more expensive than some of the simple tests we use indexly, but it also provides a decision for an important decision that actually comes with some consequences of also financial side. So that's the ecosystem we need to see. Where are these non-invasive tests placed and what decision do they actually guide?
Okay, excellent.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmesh.com, or send me a note if you're a LinkedIn follower, which many of you are. What we do next week will depend on what's going on in my family life on Monday, but we will have an episode. It will be fantastic, and we look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye now.